Hello and welcome to Heyman Nature. I am Adam Heyman. Today I have a crossover episode with Bob Murphy, and we tackle a little kerfuffle that's been going on in the Twitter sphere amongst libertarians about how we should feel about Trump's deporting people suspected of being in an illegal immigrant gang, not only out of the country, but straight to some prison in El Salvador. There's a lot of red meat on this one, and we go into a lot of little corners of this issue in a very interesting way. And then, just to give you extra bang for your listening buck, we also discuss a conversation I had recently with Stefan Kinsella, where I asked him about the is-ought gap and how that pertains to our search for some kind of morality that is objective. And I think that conversation is great. I'll link to it. And Bob's insights and commentary were also very interesting. So this is a really, really good one, a little long. I hope you'll indulge me, about an hour, 4 minutes. And let's get into it.
Heyman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Heyman.
Hi there, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
I'm very relieved to see you. I was worried that you might have, with the last name of Murphy, that you might have got swept up in that Irish illegal immigrant gang deportation thing that's been going along.
Well, fortunately, I don't ever talk with the brogue, and I don't have any tattoos.
Yeah, the 5,000 tattoos is usually one of the first.
Take your hands off of me now.
You've got to know, right? So, as might have been intimated with our clever banter there, we're talking about the deportations. I imagine you have lots of things to say.
I do, and we also have a thing queued up. So, yeah, just to set the stage, should we just set the stage for the clip, and then we'll...
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the big picture here, folks, is El Salvador has a prison set up where, you know, they put in a bunch of gang members, and it's sort of like the standard trade-off of like, hey, cleaned up, you know, the crime rates are down and the general population feels relieved, but you know, it wasn't like these people all got 16 lawyers assigned to them and they had appeals for 3 years and blah, blah, blah. And they're getting $3 a day and they got a nice luxurious penthouse inside the prison. You know, it's that kind of trade-off. And you can see in the guys in the prison, they have tattoos and stuff and they look kind of mean. And you're like, ah. So the issue though is the El Salvadoran government said to the Trump administration, hey, if you've got people you don't want to deal with, we'll take them and we'll keep them and put them in our prison. And so in these latest immigration raids, it's not simply that the Trump administration is plopping people on planes and sending them back to where they came from, to their country of origin. If the Trump administration says, oh, these people are, you know, gang members and, you know, that might have some other sort of criteria, like this isn't just, you know, some guy trying to come here for a better way of life or some mother trying to get her kid here so they can learn, you know, the times tables in U.S. educational system, but these are bad hombres, then the Trump administration is shipping them to El Salvador and letting them go to their prison. And so a lot of the objection, and there's a judge that is blocking that and saying, no, you got to give them due process. You can't just do that sort of thing. And so that's kind of how the arguments are lining up. And I guess why don't we play the Greenwald clip as he chimed in on this, and then you and I can go at it. Does that make sense?
Yep, sure does. Let's start with good old Glenn.
And just as one reminder, you know, I sometimes, and this is what I find frustrating, to be honest, about the first 2 months of the Trump administration, is it's a common claim within the MAGA movement that Bush and Cheney were terrible, that administration was terrible and destructive, the war on terror was wrong and bad, that civil liberties are vital. What the Trump administration is doing was the crux of the war on terror assault on civil liberties under Bush and Cheney. The argument of Bush and Cheney was that we have the power, because we're in a war called the war on terror, to unilaterally and with no review designate people, even American citizens, as terrorists or enemy combatants. And once we do that, we can do anything we want to them with no judicial review. We can torture them. We can kidnap them off the streets of Europe and ship them to Syria and Egypt to be tortured. We can put them in prison in Guantanamo for life. We can claim the right to spy on American citizens as long as we think it advances our interest in terms of battling terrorism. And when there were Patriot Act controversies or Guantanamo controversies, the argument of the government was, look, you just trust us. We have done a very thorough job of determining who these people are. We know they're terrorists. In fact, in Guantanamo, every person in Guantanamo, we were told, was not just a terrorist, but, quote, the worst of the worst. And at the time, there were in excess of 1,000 detainees in Guantanamo. Now there are fewer than 30 because the government over 18 years realized that these people are not threats. They have never been associated with terrorist organizations. A lot of them were picked up based on bad intelligence or deliberate vindictive reporting to the U.S. military that somebody was, or just mistaken identity. And it was only once the Supreme Court ruled in 2008 that they have an entitlement to a hearing, a habeas corpus hearing under the Constitution, even though they're not citizens and even though they're being held in Guantanamo. And they started to prove that, a lot of them did, that there was no evidence against them. We learned this lesson already. We should have learned it decades ago, even before that, that you don't trust the executive branch, the federal government, to say, we'll decide who's guilty. You don't need to see any of the evidence. They don't need any opportunity to contest it. We're good people. Trust us to do it. That's not the American system. That's not an American value. It never has been.
So grabbing people and throwing them in the worst prison on the Western Hemisphere? You have a problem with that, I assume?
Yeah. And again, I have a problem with the policy, but the thing that's really just astonished me and why I thought, Adam, you and I should talk about it here is, and we'll root this out once you and I just explain to people, they'll say, geez, sorry guys, I don't know what I was thinking. But it is people, especially those who are libertarians, and I realize how obnoxious that sounds. So I'm not saying they're fake libertarians. I'm just saying it's annoying to me and frustrating that people who are libertarians are saying this kind of stuff, but they're jumping right to, why do you, why do we care more about terrorists than about, innocent people who are being victimized? And the point is, look, the reason we have trials, the reason you have a jury trial, the reason you have a right to attorneys and things like that isn't because we want to not make it too bad for criminals. It's because we don't know ex ante who the criminals are and who the innocent people are. And we can't just trust the government to tell us, right? That's why there are trials. And so likewise in this situation, they're missing the point. The people who are saying things, and there's lots of them too, that, people who saw me go at it with some people on Twitter might think I'm just talking about one or two, but no, there's tons of people, especially in comments, piling on and saying stuff along these lines like, well, yeah, I'm sorry, but if you join a gang, your due process goes out the way, stuff like that. It's like that you're missing the point. We don't know that these people are in gangs. I'm sure a lot of them are. And also too, just think about how much leverage this gives somebody. Like, let's say somebody's here illegally and, and they're not a part of a gang at all. And the government wants them to, testify against some other criminal. And they're like, no, I don't want to get involved. They could easily just say, all right, well, if you don't, we're going to put in our report that you're a member of the such and such gang. And then you're going to El Salvador next Tuesday. Is that what you want? Here, let me show you some pictures about what's going to happen to you. So, and then you say, oh no, all the people on Twitter defending that, they're going to make sure that won't happen. And like another thing a guy said was, when I pointed this out and I said, hey, why are we as libertarians, we were so, like with the Ross Ulbricht case, there were 2 federal agents that assured us he had tried to hire hitmen. And then now, most libertarians, especially the ones that love Ross and are glad that he got pardoned, are saying, oh yeah, those agents just lied through their teeth. They were corrupt. They were stealing, funds, Bitcoins from the investigation.
Yep.
And so again, we're just going to take the government's word for it. And then, so one guy pushing back against that argument for me said something like, well, yeah, but it's a lot easier to see the tattoos on these guys than, just taking the word of somebody that Dread Pirate Roberts ordered to hit. And I was like, oh, so you've gone and you personally inspect the bodies of all the people getting shipped to El Salvador? You know what I mean? Like, what if the government is lying and say, yeah, they have tattoos? It's right. Yeah, it's on their back, left back. What if they just made that up? You get what I'm saying? Like, and it's, where people say, Bob, I hardly think someone in the federal government would lie about something like that. You know what I mean? Like, and again, with all the Trump, and after all the stuff that happened to January 6 people,
Yeah.
and to just say, oh no, and too, what was it? Is it Holman? Is that the guy's name?
Holman, yeah.
Yeah, and he was on some news show, and the reporter, or whatever was, not reporter, the host was pushing back and saying, like in this case, and he had some specific case in mind, and they said that, and this person's family is claiming that he has no gang ties, and shouldn't he at least have a hearing? Like, yeah, of course, send him back to his country of origin, but if you're going to send him to the El Salvador prison because you're saying he's a gang member, shouldn't there at least be a hearing where he can present evidence? Or you have to present evidence. And the guy was, the Holman guy was just like, this. No, we have. Well, first of all, he did a diversion and said, what's her name? Larkin Riley, is that it?
Yes, the one who was murdered by a...
Right. And he said, did she have due process? And then he and he listed some victims and said, did they have due process? And was like, well, no, because terrorists don't, or killers don't give due. That's not the issue.
Doesn't quite track. Yeah.
Right. But the criminal did get due process, was convicted. That's how it works. But then he pivoted into, or his other point was, we have all sorts of intelligence reports and blah, blah, blah to say these people have gang ties or they're terrorism and blah, 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 working for cartel. Is like, the same intelligence agencies that told us for several years that Donald Trump was a Russian agent. You see what I'm saying? Like, all of a sudden now, because it's the Trump administration, the FBI and the CIA and all these people, they're all great now, and we can totally trust them. Everyone in the Department of Justice is great, even though we all know what a bunch of liars and corrupt scumbags they were like 6 months ago. So anyway,
yeah, it does disturb me how quickly people forget the dangers of giving the government this power. And I'll quickly say, if you're in favor of this policy, you have to just be hating the fact that that Holman guy is the figurehead, because he just looks like the most corrupt face of bureaucratic heavy-handedness you could imagine, straight out of Central Casting.
Yeah. Like if you're gonna have some guy like being the sheriff at the Southern Chain Gang or whatever, what we have here is a failure to communicate.
Exactly.
Like not the guy that's gonna really be taking your constitutional rights. Worrying about it in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So can I ask you? Let's to flip it though. And so a lot of people, when I was making claims like that, were pushing back, and they were saying, let me steel man it. And they were basically saying, well, do you think there needs to be a trial just to deport someone to their country of origin? Right? Because technically, what if someone isn't an illegal immigrant? What if somebody's here? You know what I mean? And so technically, if the government just says, no, this person came from Colombia, and he's here illegally, we're just going to put him on a plane and send him back to Colombia. So I'll answer. So I think one thing is, if they were to do that, at least that person, when he gets to Colombia, could still, get a lawyer there and say, no, here's my birth certificate. I was born in Cincinnati. And what are you talking about? And here, and and then, lodge something from there, as opposed to you get shipped and you're in a really, high security max prison in El Salvador. You're not getting Clarence Darrow to work for you at that point. Like you're kind of, so that's one thing I would say.
Real quick, do you know if the extra added sprinkle of malevolence of making it a direct shipment to this El Salvadorian prison is there a reason for that, or is it just the obvious, I don't want to have to argue with the leadership of each of these individual countries and ask for their permission to accept this person back in? Is it just a way to obviate that whole discussion? I assume that's it, because there was that issue where Colombia, for example, didn't want people returned, and so he had to threaten them with tariffs or something.
I think it could. So you're asking, why is the Trump administration doing this?
Yeah,
that's your basic.
Yeah,
I think that could be part of it. Yes, it might also just be, if you want to let would-be illegal immigrants know, no, let's, Biden was one thing, but now there's this new Trump administration 2.0. Yeah, don't sneak across the border. They could be extra deterrent to say, it's not merely that if we catch you, we're going to send you back to where you came from. In which case it's like, oh, hey, I worked under the table for a few years, then I got paid. But no, you're going to this prison in El Salvador, and you can roll the dice there. Like, I think some people and also to the extent that they actually are being credible about it, or if they really are trying to screen and it's not just a crapshoot. Like if it really is the case that if they catch you here illegally and they figure out that you're probably a member of a gang or something, then you go to El Salvador. Whereas if you're not a member of a gang, you don't. Then that would be an extra deterrent for precisely the people. It's like, we really don't want you coming in here. So I guess it's possible that, that is the motivation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm going to try and steel man some of the libertarians who've been cheerleading this process.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean I agree with the arguments I'm about to present, but I do think the American populace has been sort of assaulted. There is a huge problem in the country with these illegal gang members coming across and just doing horrific things. That's not just like a joke. You can, put the right sequence of words into your Twitter search bar, and all sorts of things will come up. They're not made up. And we've also been suffering through a situation in a lot of cities with these Soros-backed prosecutors who are not prosecuting. It's not just how they're treating gang members. It's just how they're treating any violent person who maybe is on the right side of the identitarian politics spectrum, person of color, say. And so your average law-abiding citizen is probably feeling like they've been under assault, seemingly with a wink and a nod of their government, of having these people stream across the border and not only make their lives horrible with violence and criminality, but also sponge off the welfare benefits and educational system, hospitals, whatever. And it seems like, I can understand someone just being reflexively furious and looking towards a strongman to solve this problem, even if it does fly in the face of all of the structural problems you just alluded to as to what's wrong with giving the government the power to do all these sorts of things. Obviously, it will be used against you or in cases that you're not going to be so agreeable. But I'm just saying it's not completely insane that people feel this way.
Yes, there's that. And then just to extend that, I'm glad let's see, folks, here, we try to practice what we preach. So just like I'm saying, no, I don't care if the guy's got tattoos and he's got, 7 severed heads in his freezer. He needs a lawyer. We got to make sure that kind of thing. Likewise here. Yeah. I don't want to just have Adam and me vent on stuff and let's consider and, make sure we adequately steel man the people that we're taking shots at. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. And also, and I did hear you just jogged the memory. I wasn't excluding it before intentionally, but yeah, people were saying things to me to push back against the stance I was taking on this issue. They were saying stuff like, Bob, for 4 years, like the administration looked the other way and just either allowed or facilitated and encouraged law breaking, like you said, bringing people in, shipping them around so they could vote illegally and doing all kinds of stuff. And judges all along the way looking the other way, whatever, and then throwing the book at the Trump people, and now we finally, we're at the helm, and I think those guys, I think they mean well. I'm sure maybe some mistakes are made, but it's not like these are a bunch of Boy Scouts all getting sent to El Salvador. This is, in general, this is a rotten group of people, and we're gonna, let some, and also if you read the actual stricture, what the judge was writing and stuff, this isn't H.L. Mencken or something. Like this is a guy who doesn't like Trump, you know what I mean? And so anyway, that's where they're coming from. Like, guys, in the grand scheme of things, that we're getting all bent out of shape about this like the outrage is shipping 99% of gang member, people a group that are 99% gang members, we think, to El Salvador.
And let me emphasize it a little bit deeper. It goes even deeper than all those things I said, because it was also a situation where in most jurisdictions where these gang members ended up, the local DA and the cops were putting the citizenry in a situation of anarcho-tyranny. Yeah. Not only do they not seem to be interested in helping you out and doing anything about this violence, but they would come in lickety-split if you ever raised your hand in violence to protect yourself or do something about that. I point to the Daniel Penny incident on the New York City subway, and in the same city, New York, where that 61-year-old bodega operator almost got murdered. And instead of getting the keys to the city when he fought the guy off and killed him instead, they went and prosecuted him, or attempted to, until public outrage pushed back. But in a more, I mean, look what those people in Minnesota tried to do to Rittenhouse. You know, it's on video that these people are trying to murder him, and they came after him with guns a-blazing. So would you, you know, well, maybe not you, you're a very well thought out pacifist, but for the average person, they probably feel like there's not a thing I can do to protect myself even. So not only are the people I pay taxes to not helping me, they will prosecute me if I try. And so that's just an extra level of outrage that makes me sympathetic to people who are not particularly annoyed that Trump is using authoritarian measures to get rid of the tatted out seeming gang member.
Right. So yeah, not me. Yeah, we've done the thesis, antithesis, and now the synthesis here.
There you go.
Yeah. So the way I try to be judicious on this, if this had just been happening in a vacuum, and everybody on the libertarian side was saying like, yeah, there should be some due process here, and you know, in a perfect world, we like, especially if somebody's family is coming forward and saying, what are you talking about? He's not a gang member. Yeah. Like, yes, he was here illegally, and I get if you want to send him back to Guatemala, but no, don't send him my boy to that prison. Like, here, he's a good boy. Here's, you know, we got 16 character witnesses, you know, and just say, yeah, they should have a thing. And if they don't, I get it. There's a lot going on there. You know, they're trying to diffuse the war with Russia, and the Middle East is going, and all this stuff in the grand scheme. I'm not going to go around. I'm certainly not going to start spray painting swastikas on Teslas and saying Trump's a fascist because of this issue. But yeah, technically, I would prefer that they would have I would be fine. I mean, that's me. You know, I don't think Trump's a fascist, or the Trump administration is you know. But again, so the reason I'm, you know, getting upset is that when people are pushing back, and especially when their argument is, well, no, these guys are terrorists or gang members because the government said so. Like the intelligence community said so. So what's the issue here? Why do we, you know, that's what really is like, what? Like, how can you guys be saying that? So.
Yeah. And, you know, there's a lot of elements here. I mean, we're not really talking about it, but this brushes up against the immigration problem more generally, you know, a much bigger problem. And I just want to establish my anarchist bona fides, whatever. You know, I don't want there to be a government that has a monopoly on anything. I want a purely private property and cap, freedom of association and freedom of disassociation legal regime in which these things are handled by property owners and networks of associations of contract-bound property owners. And just between you and me, Bob, I suspect that the covenant community I'm going to want to live in and associate with is probably going to have a policy of not allowing these tatted up lunatic looking people in without a heavy bond, at least associated with their person and behavior. But we find ourselves in this situation.
Wait, so if I get a teardrop tattoo on my eye, you're not going to let me visit you?
You are on the exclusion list for many other reasons. There's no reason to have.
Right.
Actually, yeah, anything except a tramp stamp, I think we're going to not allow. Maybe with the exception of Mike Tyson. There's a separate problem here where we have a perverse Frankenstein thing called public property and a monopolistic government that oversees it. And in a sense, this problem doesn't have any good solution, because if you're going to use the political process to decide what is going to happen, you know, with public property and try to run it as if it were being handled privately or something, it just can't work. So in a sense, that it doesn't surprise me that we're never going to be able to solve this issue until we actually abolish monopoly government. Like, I don't think a minarchist could come up with a satisfactory libertarian solution to the immigration problem, because we're using tools that aren't appropriate.
Yeah, I agree. And with all this stuff, I know it might sound like I'm being wishy-washy, but I think it's true. Just the way I try to get around this stuff too with the immigration is, like you say, I say, well, here's what I do favor, and here's what, you know, if every piece of real estate were privately owned, this is what things would look like, blah, blah, blah. But then it's not obvious. Well, okay, so how do you go from that to, well, given that there's a government and there's, like, you know, I can give things, say, okay, given that the government has prisons, I think they should feed the prisoners, even though,
Right.
aren't you using stolen tax dollars to give food to people? I thought you were against food stamps. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if you're going to hit people in the cage, you got to feed them. Otherwise, that's worse. Right. So there's stuff like that. And then also, too, it's like, well, as an economist, if the Soviet Union came to you and, said, how many loaves of bread should we produce next year? And you say, well, I can't answer that question. I mean, but you shouldn't put rat poison in the bread. I know that. So anyway, that's kind of the thing here that, there's no good solution. I don't think it's a cop out to just say, no matter what we say, it's not going to be a good solution given that the government, is involved like this. Can I get your take, Adam? One thing
real
sorry,
quick, as an addendum before we move on, since we are where we are and this policy is in effect, I would also very much like to add to the designated terrorist watch list waitresses who refuse to refill my coffee, drive-through employees who forget to put the sauces and the ketchup in my to-go bag. I think these are crimes against humanity, and these people should be deported to a very harsh El Salvadorian prison. And I'm, much like Al Gore, super, super serial about that.
Yes, what was I? Shoot, there was somebody that was really annoying. I was at a restaurant. I mean, it was like they trained themselves to not make eye contact. Like, it was impressive.
That's right.
You know,
go right
and
past
I was like,
you.
Yeah, and I was like, the water's been out for like 12 minutes. What?
I was once waiting. Jennifer and I were waiting to be seated at a restaurant somewhere, and the hostess was really young and brand new, and wasn't even like moving around. Was just told us to wait once, and then we're all really impatient, just standing around there. And she managed to find a way to refuse to make eye contact with any of us for like 15 minutes, and she's standing right in front of us.
Wow.
Not a word.
I know this is, I'm sorry, folks, but I got it. The weirdest thing ever is years ago, I was with my wife at a diner. It was busy. And so the girl came and she took our order. I think we were there for breakfast. It was like, I think it was like on a Sunday, after church rush kind of deal. And she took our order and whatever. And, I think she gave us coffee or something. And then she was going and she kept going in the kitchen and she kept peeing out and looking at us and then popping her head back. And we waited like, I don't know, 20 minutes. We finally just got up and I left some money for the coffee. We just walked out. But like, she literally did not come back to the table and just kept peeking at us and then going back. And like I said, I mean, if you think, you're there, you ordered your food, you're hungry, on the margin, like, well, let's just give it another minute or two. And you're thinking, I'm going to, and now that I'm telling the story, like, how come I didn't march back in the kitchen? I don't know. I think it was more of a, like, well, this is an outrage. I don't want to pay for their meal if they're going to treat me like this. It was one of the, and probably a little bit of being a chicken. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say what the ratios were. But in any event, we just walked and didn't get our food. It was just the weirdest thing because the waitress just kept, it wasn't like she was busy and running around and it seemed like she forgot about us. No, she kept peeking at us. And then when we would make eye contact, she'd dip her head back in the kitchen. It was weird.
She saw your teardrop tattoo as well.
that probably could be. No, yeah.
Just to make my
telling people
story,
this guy's an anarchist. I look at this Rockwell. Look at this.
Yeah, just to make my little story tie into economics, it is interesting, and I did note at the time that this was at the lodge up on Mount Charleston, and it's like, I don't know, 30 or 40-minute drive to get up there, and there are no other eating establishments anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, well, this is what happens when you don't have any competition whatsoever. You get this person maintaining her job forever and ever. I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so what I would like your feedback on, Mr. Heyman, is I saw some people arguing, they were kind of going meta with it, and it was something like, this is why libertarians always lose when the other side is in power. They just run roughshod over us, and then when we take, but we just have we're so squeamish about using the levers of power to advance our agenda. And this is why, if we listen to you losers, we're dead, and the West is going to fall. Like, we have to strike hard when we temporarily have power because, so make it sound like the rule of law is for suckers and the Constitution's for a bunch of, bussies and stuff like that. So I know it's like related, but I'm just to make it a more general thing. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, that's a shot aimed at us that we shouldn't be surprised by. It's a perfectly rational one. And my response is, giving the government more power to do this thing that you want to do isn't on my agenda. I'd be working against my purposes if I was in favor of that. I see a long-term problem that I don't want to get involved in. And so, it's like I say, we've been suffering under left-wing authoritarianism for a long time, and I think it's horrible. It stemmed up from the universities and spread into every corporation and filtered into the government, and it's a big problem. But I don't want any right-wing version of authoritarianism either.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not interested. The people who say that aren't really libertarians. They're really right-wingers who...
Of course they're not. They're saying libertarians are losers. Like,
right.
That's why you guys are terrible. That, like they hate us more than the leftists, because it's like, you guys should know better and you just don't. It's just because you're too squeamish. It's like someone who wants to eat a chicken sandwich, but then, you're unwilling to go kill a chicken, I think is how they...
Well, they again, I guess the right wing just assumes we're on their side, but I'm not. Mm-hmm. I am for individual liberty and against statism, and these right wingers have very destructive statist policies that they are fighting for, and I'm not on board with that. I'm sorry. And you can imagine a situation where the right wing were super authoritarian and the lefties would be coming to us and saying the exact same thing. Why don't you ban with us? And I don't know, I can't even think like a lefty, but yeah, I don't know. I got to tell these people I'm not on your team. And if you wanted to elect people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul, then we would be on the same team. But, we're just not. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is, you want me on that wall.
Very nice.
So yeah, my take with that stuff too, I do understand that. I'll give them a little sliver. And some of the people, they were responding to libertarian types who were trying to push back, or even like, maybe not even just never Trumpers, but like right-wing conservative types, but who are more, cosmopolitan and beltway think tanky kind of guys, were saying things like, well, no, guys, because, if we let this happen now, well, then when the left retakes power, they're just going to do the same thing. And they're trying to make it a tit for tat kind of deal. And I understand the like right winger types, the more hardcore guys were just like, no, you guys, it's the last time the left was in charge. They weren't just doing to us what we had done to them. They did all sorts of fresh, infamies to us that they just invented. We didn't give them a precedent. And when they retake power after they just, spent all this time calling Trump Nazi or, Hitler and everything, they're going to do what they're going to do to us. And it's not as if they're going to be worse if we send some gang members to El Salvador. So don't kid yourself. It's not like we're now giving them permission to be monsters if they take over again. They're going to be monsters when they take over again. So I mean, I get that. But my point is,
take these people seriously because we are on board with Kash Patel completely upending the FBI and trying to root out all the corruption there that's humanly possible and putting people in prison. At least I am. All those people who went after Trump
after a trial where they have
exactly
an attorney provided for them if they need one.
But an El Salvadorian prison, right? I mean, come on. What they did was heinous. And what Doge is doing is, or trying to do at least, is cut back hugely on the size and scope and waste and fraud of government. And we support Trump, or at least I do, trying to end the Department of Education. Obviously, he's going to need Congress to do a thorough job of it. And he probably doesn't want to go far enough, but it's not like libertarians are lily-livered and they refuse to have Republicans, when they're in power, do good libertarian things that are shocking and upset the apple cart. I'm in favor of all the moves toward libertarianism.
We want to end the Fed. That's pretty.
I want to end the Fed. Get on board. Who's a coward now? You little right wing twerp. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be in favor of. It's that same.
Do you like your $20 bills? Well, they should go away. Gold coins.
It's like all those arguments we had in the early 2000s about the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA and all this garbage. They weren't doing what the right winger said they were going to do. Instead, they were turned against us, American citizens, and made our lives miserable. And,
you're getting me kind of fired up. I like it. Yeah. I think that's a good answer. Like in the Rodney Dangerfield when Sam gives a good answer.
Sam Kinison. Yeah. Great
okay.
movie.
I like that. Yeah. Because what my take was going to be, like I liked yours. Yours is probably better. But what I was going to say is, You're right. The argument for why we shouldn't violate someone's rights is not because then that would implicitly give permission to the other side to violate our people's rights when they take over. It's because it's the wrong thing to do, right? Like, it's not that I'm refraining from spray painting a hammer and sickle on any AOC fan's car because, well, I don't want them spray painting a swastika on Teslas. It's just, no, I don't just go out and destroy random people's property. Well, they're not even random. I don't go and destroy people's property because of a loose connection to a political figure, even if I think that political figure is awful. I just don't go around destroying people's property. That's not how I roll. And so, or, you can, I won't say anything graphic, but you could exaggerate too. Like, you're not going to go hurt somebody's kids, even if they're doing it to us. Just like, no, we don't do that because we're trying to be the good guy. As a Christian, it's like, well, yeah, nobody's good except Jesus. But you get the point. We're trying to be the good guys. So that means that's why we don't do that stuff, because we're the good guys. And you wouldn't, it's not like the Autobots are saying to Optimus Prime, well, why don't we, rob banks and capture innocent civilians and do things like that because the Decepticons are doing that. And he'd say, because we're the good guys. That's why they're bad and we're fighting them. We're trying to stop them from being bad guys, So anyway, so to me, it's sort of missing the point. If they're basically saying, why be moral? Like this is such a drag to have to abide by all these side constraints on what we're allowed to do in the world. Like that, I could accomplish my ends more easily if if there were no moral prohibitions on various types of activity. Well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And where I probably will differ with you, and to try and reestablish my red-blooded American male card with these right-wingers is, as I alluded to earlier, one of my biggest objections with the way the left has been running law and order is by really rolling the tanks for a citizen who steps up to defend himself or others, Daniel Penny style. That really bothers me. And I think in a much more legitimate and honest governmental structure, crime wouldn't be deterred because criminals were afraid of the cops.
You'd like to see more homeless people being choked to death, is what you're saying.
That wasn't the point I was making. But if it was me in that car, he wouldn't have been choked to death because I don't have jujitsu skills. But if I had decided foolishly to try and protect someone else on that train or my wife, rather than fleeing, if it was me, he'd have a bullet hole in him. Because I am not a trained.
Oh, I misunderstood.
fighter.
I thought what you were saying, and I believed you, is that if Daniel Penny had been in there and you had also been there, you would have went and helped him.
Oh, I probably would have.
So he
wouldn't
wouldn't have.
If he wasn't there,
yeah,
and I was. Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm afraid of the cops, and I probably would have tried to slink away as long as the guy wasn't right in front of my wife or something. But if I'm there, I'm not a Marine in my 20s with that kind of hand-to-hand training. He wouldn't be restrained. I'd put a bullet hole in him. And I really, really wish that people who want to hurt and murder and rape and create mayhem, I wish they were given free rein to be afraid of the citizens. The cops are protecting criminals from the citizens right now. And I think that's truly perverse.
Yep. I agree. Even though I'm a pacifist. By the way, let me spell that out for people who think I'm contrary. Well, no, if you're a pacifist, right, then even though I think in a perfect world or a better world, people would come up with nonviolent ways to deal with subway ruffians, you don't crack down on that by having the police come in and throw them in cages and, with guns. And you see what I'm saying? So
yes, anyway, I do.
You don't achieve pacifism through the use of violence.
I would be very happy to live in a Bob Murphy adjudicated legal landscape.
Yep. The guy would be coming up and, reeking of alcohol and stuff and start getting your face. All of a sudden, the big net would fall from the subway ceiling on the guy. Like, Murphy,
I feel like you're so serious about it that you would find a way to invent the Star Trek phaser set to stun that worked every time. I think you could actually do that.
I would do stuff. I mean, short of that, but there are tons of things they could do that would, somebody hits the panic button and the, barricades come down or something and isolate.
Freeze ring.
Yeah.
Freeze ring.
Everyone, you can go to, I'm brainstorming. You go into different subway cars and hit the button and the doors lock. You know what I mean? So some guy starts acting like a nut job and then people could just run and then hit the thing. And at the next station, the cops are there and they're just wearing the body armor and they're, They don't have. They had like the bolas. I like those things. The things that you throw and it wraps around your ankles. Those are my favorite.
Those are very sexy.
Is that a bola, or am I saying something?
It is a bolo. Yes.
I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have a few of these weapons, but anyway, and they're also in the subway, so that's they don't even have to go very far. They can
This
be
thing
there.
writes itself.
Rapid response. All right. So, what else? Oh, so this leads into, I think, this is, we're getting at the essence of morality here, or the economic analysis of it, that there's a lot of elements of game theory where I was toying with doing this as my dissertation in grad school, and then the main reason I stopped is because I saw somebody else already did it. Like I had two books at that point. I was like, all right, he kind of made the main points, and this terrain has already been plowed. But the idea, like the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, everybody. I don't need to recapitulate that. I think everybody knows that. Yeah. So the point is there. Like, yes, if you're just doing a completely rational, consequentialist analysis, you should, rat on your buddy whether or not you guys are guilty, just because, no matter what he does, I do better. The consequences are better for me if I, betray him and squeal the cops and whatever. And then, he does that too. Whereas if you both had done the quote principled thing and kept quiet, then it's better for you. And I think there's a lot of situations like that. Just, if you're at your neighbor's party and the guy's wallet is lying out in the open, you go, to get your coat or something, and you see the guy's wallet's there, and you could take it. You're not going to get caught. You could take that, and he's not going to realize it's gone until the next morning, and there's 50 guests. And we're all better off if we live in a world where you just don't do that, not because you're running the calculations. No, I might just think, no, I'm not stealing that guy's wallet. That would be wrong. I'm not doing that. Right. So if we all, live in a world where most of us in society have these prohibitions that you can, blame it or attribute it to evolution. You can attribute it to God, whatever you want to do, just your upbringing and whatever. But that we refrain from certain things because that would just be wrong and we don't want to be immoral, then that ends up showering benefits on you, even if in a particular instance you could run the cost benefit and be like, well, no, if we violated the rule here, actually that would probably help us. It's like, right, but if you start thinking like that, then it breaks down and then it doesn't work and you actually are worse off.
This is a very minor tangent, but I think you'll appreciate it. I think you do yourself a benefit by just adopting the simple rule of not stealing, even if it didn't help. I mean, without even thinking about the society-wide consequences.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, actually running the numbers to figure out if you could get away with taking this wallet and nothing bad would happen to you in the future. That's all really, really complicated, and you're likely to get it wrong as often as you do get it right. So rather than wasting all that brain power, and making of yourself an unadmirable person, it's much better for you, I say, even from a game theory perspective, to just adopt that rule. I'm not a thief. I don't steal.
Mm-hmm.
Less headaches. You will definitely get caught fewer times
Right.
stealing from other people and getting the shame, derision, whatever penalty there is on top of that. I don't even think you need to go to the society-wide model to make the game theory work out that you should just not steal.
And a quick anecdote on that. I mean, it's related. We used to play cards a lot in high school, and typically, I would have a lot of cash on me, and I would I'd have 2 decks of cards in my car and stuff, and I could shuffle. It's like I would typically be the dealer, and I could deal fast, and there were some kids too, like if they just saw me shuffling 2 decks of cards, they'd be like, whoa, this guy knows what he's doing, right? So anyway, I would typically be the house, and I would carry a notepad around me because, a kid would have $10, he'd throw it in, he might lose fast, and then he'd want to keep playing, so I would lend him money, and then I would just keep, and I'd have him initial and stuff. So I would go around with this notebook, just keeping track of in the certain friend group how much everybody owed me, or various people, not everybody, but you get the point. And so then there was one time where this kid, was like, yeah, let me play. And I was like, okay, but you owe me $30 from last time. He's like, no, I don't. I paid you. I was like, no, dude, if you pay, we scratch. And the kid was arguing with, and he didn't really know me very well. And all the other people just looked at him and they go, no, Bob doesn't lie. If he says you owe him $30, you owe him $30. You know what I mean? And I was like, all right. So me not cheating people. Whereas another guy that was in the thing cheated all the time. Like everyone just knew but he would come in with $100 bill and stuff. So that's why we still wanted him to play, because there was a lot, at stake, but you had to watch him like a hawk. And so if it ever came down to him saying something and someone else disagreeing, the group would not have said, "Oh, come on!" If he said like this, no, that guy's a pathological liar.
That's really interesting. In the home game poker community, it is very common that we let known cheats play because they play just so bad they lose anyway. It's
Right.
kind of, but you bring up a point that's not unique or anything. But yeah, game theory should always be iterative. And, you having a great reputation of being honest over a long iterative period, that works to your favor.
And also to reinforce what you're saying too, is I think added to it, besides just like the miscalculation or whatever, I think too, like I used to ask myself, like that kid that I'm talking about, I remember in high school, like he would lie even when it didn't serve his interest.
Isn't that weird?
And I've noticed some people that I, call that's what I mean by a pathological liar. Like I use that term very, with precision. And what I mean is somebody who lies even when it doesn't help them in the moment. Like they just like lying. And I think, after a while, you just lose that. Like for me, like if the kind of thing of, I don't know, some mugger's point his gun at me and he says, say right now that Murray Rothbard is a terrible economist or I'm going to shoot you. Like I mean, I would really have angst about it, what I mean? Let alone, denouncing Jesus or something, which, I would like to say, I would say, no, shoot me. So anyway, whereas I know there are people like that's just not even a thing. And like we're saying, I think that actually hurts you. That, it'd be like if you didn't have a sense of smell or something like that would be bad if you're going through life. And so, if you lost your moral disgust factor, like, no, if I did something immoral, like it causes me physical discomfort, that's actually hurting you, even though in one sense you might say, I'm removing constraints.
Yeah, constraints are good. They speed up your decision-making process, allowing you to think higher and deeper about other things other than, should I steal from this guy in this particular second or not? And I think you should have a balancing act, like to take your situation with the mugger and the gun and forcing you to say Murray Rothbard's literally retarded. I think it's right for you to have serious qualms about saying those words. And I also think it's right for you having the pragmatism to say, yeah, well, it really doesn't matter that much when you compare the alternatives, Thomas Sowell style, of getting shot. So yeah, I'll go ahead and say those words.
Thursday, I thought you were going to say, I'll say Thomas Sowell's not that great. But is that okay? Like maybe just whack me with the gun if I just say that?
And again, I mean, we're not treading, brand new territory here, but I believe strongly in property rights and not aggressing against other people in their stuff. But if I'm lost alone in the winter in a forest and I stumble across a well-provisioned heated cabin, I will break in and feed myself. And I will also throw myself at that man's mercy and do everything I can to repay everything I did.
Right.
And, whether I am prosecuted, that's not up to me, but I'm going to save my life and just ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, and by the same token, if I had that cabin in the woods where I'm not going to booby trap it so that if somebody does break in, they go in it like the big bear trap chops his hand off or something.
God, that would be wicked. I really believe in protecting my property.
So what do you think? Do you want to, I know we had toyed with, you recently had stuff in Kinsella. Why don't we go ahead and do it? We got.
Well, we can at least broach the issue.
Yeah.
I feel like this might be something we could talk for another 45 minutes on, but let's at least broach it.
Sure. And so you had them out and like the is-ought distinction came up. Like, so
yeah,
I explain.
I have trouble with the is-ought gap. I think it was David Hume who finally had the last word on this, that you cannot derive an ought.
I thought he had the first word on it. Go ahead. I mean, like in philosophy, I'm sure
he closed the door on it.
But I'm saying a lot of philosophers will point to and say, Hume famously raised the is-ought distinction. Like there have been tons of
maybe he did
commentary post.
Maybe he was that distinctive. But anyway, that you cannot derive a moral principle, i.e., an ought, from a fact about physical reality and is. And I get his point, but I also think we do that every day. we can't possibly make moral arguments without reference to an is. And as Stefan remarked in the conversation I had with him, which is great, check out Heyman Nature on YouTube and look for Stefan Kinsella, STEPHANKINSELLA. As he remarked, once you do the move as Hans Hermann Hoppe did in his argumentation ethics of saying we are either fighting, in which case morality just boils down to a question of force, or we're trying to derive the rules of behavior to resolve disputes that are appropriate for beings engaged in an argument. And there are a lot of principles that automatically you are adopting, like you own your body and private property rights and a bunch of other things spell out from there. And so, I mean, the whole point of my show, Heyman Nature, really is to derive a whole bunch of oughts about how humanity ought to conduct itself, broadly speaking, given our nature as a species and the state of the universe. And all I think you have to do to be able to bridge the is-ought gap is to have peaceful human welfare as your goal. And if you're not interested in having that discussion, again, you're just fighting now. And that's not complicated. It's just brute force. If you want to live in that world, okay.
Okay, interesting. So I'm sure most people vaguely know what we're talking about, or maybe they know it very concretely. But let me just make sure we're not losing people. So the is-ought distinction, or sometimes it's referred to as the fact-value dichotomy, right, or the fact-value gap. The idea is if you're just making a bunch of descriptive statements about reality, you can't go from that to a should, right? So just
right.
The sun rises, water boils at this temperature.
Therefore, you should eat strawberry ice cream.
Right.
And lots of it.
And where it seems like this is, we use this distinction like in Austrian economics and can say that, it's value free. It's in the sciences, a lot of times the distinction is often called the difference between a normative and a positive analysis. So a positive analysis is just saying if the government does this, then a recession will happen. It's not saying the government shouldn't do that. Maybe we want a recession to happen.
We'd love to have one. Yeah.
You have to have as one of your axioms that unemployment is bad, or involuntary unemployment is bad, and recessions are bad, and prosperity is good. And then you can say, so therefore the government should, have hard money or blah, blah, blah. But strictly speaking, you could be an Austrian and also be a Marxist. Like Walter Block would make that point, at Mises University to try to get the students to get the difference between positive and normative statements. Right. So anyway, so given that bifurcation, then, and that a lot of philosophers, and as Adam says, David Hume really crystallized that, and people argue about that. And I have seen, so it's interesting because like the whole natural law enterprise seems to try to get around that, to just say, no, there are certain things, like to just explain, like people have rights, for example, and you can't do this to people just because human nature entails certain privilege or rights. I said privileges that they have, and it would be wrong. So there's idea of if you think there's an objective morality, then it's hard to understand how do you get to that, given the fact value, if there is a fact value gap, right? And so you're right. And one way that people try to get through it is just make a bunch of conditional statements. Just like you say, well, if you like vanilla ice cream, then you should put the cone under the vanilla one. And if you want to have, a prosperous society, then you should put rapists in jail. But just like, hey, you could like vanilla or chocolate. And hey, if somebody genuinely says, no, I think raping is so awesome that I'm okay if that means we can't have, nice houses in a world where that's allowed. There's no way you could prove the guy wrong just using arguments. The way if he said, no, I think the way we can get to the moon is to do, well, and I know that there's no way to get to the moon given current technology, but you get the point. That no, he would just be wrong. Like, it should be clear to people. It's not just that he wouldn't admit it, right? Like some guy could say, I don't believe in the Pythagorean theorem, and he's just wrong. But if you take the fact value gap seriously, somebody who just says, no, I reject your premises or your axioms, I don't see why cold-blooded murder, as you describe it, is immoral. What are you talking? I don't believe in morality. And the point is, what string of statements could you make to the guy to show him that he's wrong?
Well, I wouldn't suggest you even try. Well, first of all, don't invite that guy to your house for the weekend.
Right.
And second of all, we're engaged in a completely different game with a guy who thinks using force on you is is part of this equation. Again, we're not discussing morality anymore. We're doing that other thing, lock and load. It's interesting, as I said to Stefan, the people who bring up David Hume and the Izzat Gap and rail against the whole process of any kind of a natural law or morality argument, as soon as they think they've beat you and said your whole enterprise is unjustified, with their very next breath, they're going to tell you what they think morality should be. And maybe they won't even bother trying to justify it. But all these people have a set of laws they want you to live under. I guarantee that. And what are they going to? What do they point to? Like democracy or something?
Yeah, I mean, this gets into. And by the way, just so people don't misunderstand, I'm not sure what I think of the fact value gap, because I used to, certainly when I was an atheist, I believed in it. And then David Gordon one time reviewed a book. Shoot, I should have looked it up. It might have been Philippa Foot, but I could be wrong. Where a more recent, like within the last 20 years, of a philosopher tackling that head on. And my summary of this philosopher's response to David Hume, when David Hume says you can't derive an ought from an is, my summary of the person's response is, who says? You can't. Obviously they wrote a whole book on it, but that's basically what it was. Like, you're just asserting that. What I mean? Like, it does sound plausible. Like I said, in the sciences and with economics, it totally makes. Oh yeah, we're just doing and the reason Mises stressed that, and he was saying, just like a physicist can advise the government and say, if you want to, send projectiles and hit this city, and you want to take out these buildings and set a fire and do this, here's how you would do it. But that's a separate question. Say, should you do that? You know what I mean? Like, that's you have to bring in moral judgments. You understand the distinction they're making there, like just about describing how the material world works versus human values and things like that, and what are our goals. But yet, it is kind of just to say, yeah, if you just say you can't derive an ought from an is, who says? And like that, it just why should we think that? And so I think there's that element too.
Yeah, I think everybody who has an opinion about what morality should be is justifying their position based on some kind of an is. And when it comes to religious people, they're referring to the grandest is there could possibly be imagined, right? An all-loving, omnipotent God. Mm-hmm. If that isn't an is, I don't know what the word means. And everybody's like that. The only way we can try and figure out what should be done is by reference to what is. So what are we even talking about?
Yeah, right. So I guess, in fairness to somebody who thinks that Hume's distinction is valid and helpful, they might respond to what you just said and said, okay, yeah, but when you say the only way to get a morale is to refer to what is, if part of what is included in your is things like, and I really just have an aversion to watching kittens drown. And I really don't, I feel squeamish if I see human infants suffering. If that's part of the is statements that you're plugging in, and then out pops, so therefore, you shouldn't go around bashing in infants' heads or something with a baseball. But okay, but they're going to say you smuggled the moral value on the front end. So I think, like, to agree with what you're saying, Adam, I think like a standard Christian who says, no, murder and theft and coveting even are objectively sinful. It's not just matters of taste. It's not just like, I prefer vanilla over ice cream. That no, those are objectively wrong. And why? Because there's a God. And you're right that they're not. They are kind of melding the two together, and they're making a statement. They could be wrong. If you're an atheist, you think they're wrong, but they're doing it that way. And this, I know this gets into weird stuff that we're certainly not going to be able to solve right now, but about, is stuff objectively good because God says it's good, or does God say it's good because it's good independent of his opinion of the matter? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, whether you believe or don't believe in God, I don't have a problem with the structure of that argument per se. And just as when discussing the proper legal framework for our species, I think it's proper to reference the Hoppian argumentation ethics and Austrian economics and all the other things that we believe as libertarians. I think that's a Those are the correct elements in that endeavor. And as for the rest of the way we ought to behave, I do think it's appropriate to, quote, smuggle in the way almost everybody on the planet feels when they see somebody drowning a kitten or bashing the brains out of a helpless infant. I think taking into account our very, very deep, natural, emotional responses to things, I think that's part of the equation. It's not all of it, obviously, but I think you are going to be living a very awful life if you try and go against that and try and make yourself like watching snuff films and doing horrible things to kittens and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of things that you need to take into account about the right way to treat your neighbors and your family and your siblings and the kind of conversations you have. It's a complicated endeavor, but a lot of things go into it. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
A recent example of someone trying to flip the conventional argument, it was I had Jonathan Menn on the Bob Murphy show recently, and so there's this what's called the problem of evil, right? Like that's one of the big problems for the God of, at least the major monotheistic religions is if he's this powerful and he's good, why is he letting all this bad stuff happen, right? And it's a serious argument or issue. And so Jonathan, he tried to flip it and say, when people say things like that, they're acknowledging, they're not just saying the world isn't the way I would prefer, right? Like you just say, yeah, I wish there was more classical music or not. That when they say the problem of evil, but using that term evil, not the problem of things I find unsatisfactory, but to say the evil means you think there really are things that are evil. It makes sense to talk about that. And so his point was, tell me if you don't have a God in your framework, if you just think that, no, there was the Big Bang and, we're part of a multiverse where all the dials were turned just so that, pond scum could have amino acids and blah, blah, blah. And then humans are walking around. What do you mean? Is it immoral if a lion eats a zebra? So what, no, this guy broke into your house and shot up the family and, took your, he's just doing what he's doing. He's passing on his genes. What are you talking about? Evil. And so, his point, he tried to flip it and say the fact that you think, so that he, in his mind, it's more like if evil's a problem for the theist, then he was saying good and evil are both problems for the atheist.
Yeah, I listened to that interview you had, and we'll link to it in the show notes, folks. I wasn't impressed with that aspect of his argument because I do think certain elements of morality are broadly objective, and I don't believe in God, so clearly I don't think I'm making a mental contradiction. But there was part of what he said in that area that I liked quite a bit. At least I hope I'm attributing the right thought and argument to the right man. But I think he said something about the virtue of having evil in the world from, say, God's perspective and ours, is that it highlights what good is in interacting with and dealing with and confronting evil. Our species, it's called into sharp relief to our species what good virtuous behavior is. If we lived in peaceful sunshine and daffodils, with manna from heaven just falling around, the Garden of Eden, the noble virtues of man wouldn't be that important, right? Because who cares? We're not struggling. But if we are struggling, perhaps struggling against truly awful things, then that helps us clarify some of the most important, like bravery, courage, honesty, loyalty. These are things that there have to be some bad things in the world for those things to make sense or to be important, I guess.
I like everything you just said, and I agree with that. I could be wrong, though, but what I for sure remember Jonathan saying is that for us to fully appreciate all of the aspects of God's character, there need to be evil humans or humans doing evil things, because that lets us see like his justice and his mercy and, and this long suffering patience. So I for sure remember him saying that.
It would certainly be fitting if he said that and then I filled in the rest of that in my own head. That would be perfectly normal.
Took it and said, go through, search for God, delete, universal, replace all of God for secular humanism. Yeah.
You are literally describing the large language model running right here in my noggin.
All right. Well, that's probably a good spot to wrap up.
We should probably let the good folks go.
We have objectively let this episode go too long.
Thank you, Bob, for this. This was great as always. If you're listening to this on Heyman Nature, please go check out The Bob Murphy Show, where Bob does other content that does not feature me. And if you're doing the other thing, please check out Heyman Nature on YouTube and also on your podcatchers. That's HAMAN Nature. And I also have a great Substack you should check out at heymannature.substack.com. Thank you again, Bob, and catch you next time.
Thank you, Adam. And folks, remember, drowning kittens, it's not just distasteful, it's wrong.
Well said.